we're back to the Zundapp KS600 engine rebuild. This time we're going to look at the piston rods and the bearings. Now, the bearings on the Zundapps, the bigger ones, the twins, so the K500, KS600, K800 and KS750 all came along with these split cage needle roller bearings, as you can see here, which obviously consist of two parts to a cage. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, these have a bit of a reputation, an alleged reputation I should say, for failing in a catastrophic way and destroying the engine, all this kind of stuff. Now, I've never met anybody that's happened to. I've never heard of anybody that's happened to, and I don't know anybody who knows anyone that's happened to. Now, I decided to look at this and spend some time figuring out what could be the cause and if it's true or not. And because obviously these they were designed for the KS600, which was a successful bike on its own, and then you can imagine that when Zundapp sat down and designed the KS750 specifically for war, you would have thought if there was a real problem with the KS600 needle rollers, that they would have taken the opportunity to redesign them whilst designing the KS750. Because obviously you don't want the KS750 going into war and breaking down every 5 minutes, or the engine writing itself off. And even after the war, they then went back to the KS601. These rods are from a KS601 because they're slightly different than the KS600 original ones. And they didn't take the opportunity to redesign them as well. So you can only assume that they were quite happy with the design and that they continued with them. Now, most people have updated them nowadays to shells, which have advantages and disadvantages. They're certainly much easier to install than these needle rollers, but they are much higher friction, of course. So let's have a look at the basic construction. So we have over here a box full of parts coming in. Let's grab some of these. And here you can see the needles. So we've got these needles, which when new were 3.1 millimeter. It's very slight pitting on there. And these obviously slot into these like that. And they will then form the basis of rolling. Now, one thing you'll notice on these is that when you insert those in there, you'll see that there's not actually very much, they don't protrude very much at all. See, I'll try and show it, I'll get a bit closer. There's probably only about 0.5 mil, if that, protrusion when you press the cage and the needle roller into the face of the rod there. That protrusion level is very, very small. Now that's absolutely critical because that is the core of the problem. So when you're rotating these, what happens is that I'll use this one here, as these go round, they rotate inside the actual rod, and if you can just see down in there where the join is, as this needle, the cage comes round, it catches. See it just there? I'll try and focus a bit better. It just catches on there, which breaks off this front rod there, or front part of the cage. That snaps off, and then the next one catches, and that snaps off, and so on and so forth, until eventually ends up lots of bits of bronze in there. So the key to these is to ensure that when you're installing these, the faces are absolutely crystal smooth. Let me just assemble this. So we screw this together quickly. Right, so got that like that. There we go. Right, so we've assembled this. A bit rough, I know. But that'll do. So you get the gist anyway. So once you've assembled this and you've tightened it, you then want to feel that there, and you'll be able to feel the very slightest ridge. And I mean, you're talking absolutely minuscule. So align these up the best you can. There we go, that feels quite nice. And then tighten these. And then once you've got them the best you can, you basically need to make sure you grind those faces like this. So if we set it up like that, and get some sandpaper on the biggest diameter disc that you can get to fit in there, like so. and then give them a little polish like this, and keep doing that until, obviously these would be tight, but until those faces are perfectly smooth. And that will then when you install these back in, you will make sure that if there is a rotation problem, these will never ever snag. So as these needle rollers start to wear down, these cages will still slide quite neatly inside, and certainly give you many thousands of miles notice before you need to actually take it apart and get some new ones or replace them with something else. Now that's the biggest cause of the failure, is definitely the snagging of these cages, and I've got a lot of these. I've got about 20 or 30 pairs of them, and on some of them you see this very first bronze strip here is actually cracked, and you occasionally see little hairline cracks along this corner, and that is definitely where they're coming around and they're snagging there. And if you look on the side of this cage as well, sorry, on this rod, you'll see that there's a chamfer there, and that chamfer is to stop the inside of this face from catching this polished face of the rod on rotation like this. So it's important as well that chamfer is maintained. So obviously, as you probably know, when you're installing these, in order to check the size, you take the crank out of the engine, you'd install them with the needles and rollers in your hand, and you put them on there, and you'd feel how much play there is on the thrust line like this, so down the rod axis. And you can adjust that by taking these and sanding them like that on a piece of paper, sandpaper, very gently. Give them a few 20 or 30 movements, then reassembling them like this and doing it again. So that's step one to assembling these. So you would adjust the amount of play in the thrust axis. Then you'd install your rollers. You'd see how they feel. Then you would take them all apart again, and you'd tighten all this up, and you would then grind these faces to make sure there was absolutely, you couldn't feel anything at all. They should be silky smooth. Once you've done that, quite a nice little tip is obviously how you're then going to install it, because it's quite difficult to see how they feel, because when you screw them back together, if they're even like this slightly, there's enough there to get that lip back. So what I decided to do was, a little tip here is, when you screw these together tight, I then polished the surface on the outside of this, so that when you're installing in the engine, you can put your finger and you can feel the groove that side as well as inside. So if this is dead silky smooth, then the inside must be silky smooth too. So you can actually adjust these up and down a little bit as you're putting them together. So that's that element of it. And the other thing worth noting is, with all of these cages, you'll see they've got numbers on. There we go. Trying to get to focus. You can see that one says 47. About there, and these are obviously pairs, and that's quite important, because if we bring one of these back again, we can see over here there's a bit of wear between the cage joints, and the significance of that is that will obviously allow this to open up here like that. It allows that particular rod holder there to be slightly wider, as there's a limit to how much play you want on that, and the gap, of course, there is determined pretty much by the exact size of the cages and the diameter of your crankshaft as well that you're fitting these to. Now the numbers on the side are not only significant because they're matched pairs, but they also are wear indicators. So as these bearings wear, looking down that way like this, these will wear away here, and you can measure the thickness of this wall, and that will determine how much play you have in this axis when the engine's installed. Some play is okay because it allows the piston to float better, but you don't want excessive like that. So you can check those as well. You can see these are both number 33, and the numbers, these are not installed correctly, by the way. The numbers should always face the same side. So that's pretty much it for the split caged bearings. Now, like I said, they've had a bit of well, I've read anyway in a few forums and stuff, not a massive amount, but I have read that everyone says, oh, you should put shells in, all this kind of thing. The shells are no doubt at all easier to install. You need better oil supply, all that kind of thing. But these are very low friction. You can feel the difference in the engine. These literally roll really smoothly, and they feel almost frictionless when they're in. They're actually quite nice. And I would imagine that many a rumour of failure is actually down to not understanding how they actually work and what would cause them to snag and break. You know, many people would say, oh, the R12, compare the KS600 to the R12 and all that kind of thing, but the R12 is a significantly less powerful engine. It's probably 40%, 45% less powerful. It's from a previous generation. Yes, the bearings are robust, but if you were to put it in perspective, it's like saying, you know, driving the KS600 around at 1500 RPM for most of his life, like a generator, you know, and that's the sort of horsepower difference you're talking about, in which case it wouldn't be surprising they would plod along. You know, this is obviously for its time, a very high powered engine, and required low friction bearings in order to achieve that power as well. Anyway, got any questions? Leave them in the comments.